I think I'd like to move now to the audience participation part of the evening. I'm going to ask Tim Gallimore to come up. Oh, I can't see with the lights in my eyes, but maybe Tim can come up and give us a brief, some brief comments on the conversation thus far, and then we'll reach out to all of you.
Thank you for giving me opportunity, for inviting me to the presentation, and for being brave enough to sponsor the presentation to OSI. I'm going to take full advantage of this time that you've given me, and if I get to 10 minutes, tell me to stop, and I will stop. There are many things that have been said tonight that really bear much more scrutiny, and I know the forum is not the very best to go into the details, but there are several statements, generalizations, accusations that were made that I find no justification, no evidence for at all on the international stage, in the press, or anywhere else where credible human beings would look. And at the end of my presentation, I can give you very specifics of some of the things that the panelists and the moderator have said that I want to take issue to, because they do not lie anywhere in reality that I know about and other reasonable people know about. But as far as my contribution to this discussion, I want to take a very strong departure from the what has been said and done here, and to focus very specifically on what I think is beneath some of the anxiety and the discomfort that some of the panelists expressed about Rwanda and its present government and leadership. As a U.S. State Department consultant, I was among the first Americans who went to Rwanda in 1997 to assist the country in rebuilding the journalistic corps and establishing a private media system. During that visit, I had a chance to talk with Ambassador Charles Staples about expectations that the U.S. government had for the development of democracy and conducting elections in Rwanda. He assured me that the State Department would view Rwanda as a special case because of the devastation that took place in that society through the genocide. He said that the U.S. would not push Rwanda to conduct elections and to do all the other things that we consider in the West to be measures of democracy. It's unfortunate that the promise of Ambassador Staples and the goodwill of others, including human rights organizations, have not prevailed with respect to Rwanda's recovery and political development. Over the years, I've noticed that there has been a double standard when it comes to assessments of democracy in Rwanda, justice in Rwanda, freedom of expression in Rwanda, and human rights in Rwanda. No other country, not even the United States, is being held to the standards and expectations that are being imposed on Rwanda in many crucial domains. The fact that we're having this panel discussion, titled and advertised that it was, and laced with some of the poisonous rhetorical questions that were poised to guide the discussion, is evidence that there is a double standard being applied when it comes to Rwanda and to President Kagame. It's hard to imagine that a similar panel would be assembled to examine the myth of President Obama, or the myth of the Prime Minister of Israel, or any other world leader for that matter, or to explore in serious public debate the unsubstantiated charges and allegations of serious crimes that have been made against Paul Kagame. Read the announcement, the advertisement for this panel, from where I draw these conclusions. Now, we're not here to debate the wisdom or appropriateness of the U.S. trying to make the world over in its own image, but it is necessary to examine the double standard that is being applied to Rwanda, especially in the area of freedom of expression, and particularly when it comes to the laws that are against the denial of genocide of the Tutsi that took place in 1994. Yes, freedom of expression is an important component of a free society and for ensuring human rights of individuals. But freedom of expression is not absolute. It has its limitation, always has and it always will in every society. I know what I'm talking about because I have a PhD in mass communications with a specialization in media law and international communications. In fact, I wrote a doctoral dissertation about freedom of expression as it relates to the United States. The history of freedom of expression in the United States contains many chapters about suppression of dissidents, aliens, legal and otherwise, communists, socialists of every stripe, of unpopular religious groups such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the silencing of other critical voices and vulnerable minorities who question the orthodoxy of their day and express political views that the majority found intolerable or offensive. These groups and their ideas were characterized as threats to domestic government, to the peace, and they were considered a clear and present danger. It is hypocritical for human rights organizations in the U.S. and elsewhere to act as if these practices do not still exist in democratic countries and that they point to as paragons of virtue when it comes to freedom of expression and respect for human rights. American journalists are still obligated to obey court injunctions and gag rules that put prior restraint on their right to broadcast and publish what they please. Libel and invasion of privacy are recognized civil offenses that journalists and private parties are still accountable for under U.S. law. It is at your peril today, as an American, if you exercise freedom of expression and choose to threaten the life or limb of the president or anyone in the line of succession to the presidency. With respect to genocide denial laws and expression about ethnicity and divisionism, we're not talking about threatening the life of a single person, but of a group that has been targeted for extermination and partially was exterminated in 1994 and before. In the United States, we recognize that as a limitation in 2011 to threaten the life of the president or anyone in succession to the presidency. Today, freedom of expression is prohibited if we look at the resulting imminent lawless action that people look at speech for and say, when it comes to these kinds of expressions, we ought not to tolerate them. America still finds it necessary to publish speech and to guard against evils. Rwanda must also be vigilant against this clear and ever-present danger of genocide manifested in the ideology and action of those who have vowed to finish the job that they started in 1994. They have expressed it in church houses and schoolhouses across the country. They have expressed it to UN staff members, UN tribunal staff members, and publicly on Rwandan public radio stations. The history of such expression in Rwanda testifies definitively that there is no greater threat to the nation than the imminent lawless action promised by these would-be perpetrators. So in response to this documented danger, the government of Rwanda conducted studies, held parliamentary debates, promulgated laws, prohibited genocide ideology, denying, negating, minimizing, justifying, or approving of genocide, and prohibiting discrimination and sectarianism. Instead of applauding these measures as prudent actions of a responsible government, Rwanda has been severely criticized and accused of suppressing political dissent, of media censorship, and of denying human rights. The double standard is even more obvious when you consider that laws against Holocaust and genocide denial exist in more than 15 countries around the world, including Rwanda. No other country with similar laws is criticized as Rwanda is. Rwandans today are free to say what they want to say. I was just there, 2 months there, came back in August. People have told me all kinds of things, including criticism of the government, people in the parliament, in the media, and in the streets. They can say what they want. There is no prior restraint exercised by the government in Rwanda that I know of. However, genocide deniers, minimizers, trivializers, sympathizers must face the consequences of their expressions and pay the price for their illegal actions. It took more than 150 years of freedom of expression to mature to the level where it is now in the United States. Rwanda is being asked to reach the same level of tolerance just 17 years after the devastating genocide, primarily moved by the media and discussion in the society. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an unfair and vicious double standard. The United States has 4% of the world's population and 25% of incarcerated population in the world. The United States is 5th among nations with the death penalty that still execute prisoners. In 2010, the U.S. executed 46 people. America's record on the use of torture, an extraordinary rendition of suspects to countries like Libya, is well known. The systemic discrimination against ethnic minorities is a continuing, pervasive practice in American society, as is racial profiling by law enforcement agencies. In fact, the courts just stepped in Texas last week to hold up an execution of an African-American man in Texas because they have found that the judicial system was racist, and also there were racist comments made by an expert witness during the course of the proceedings. Now, two wrongs never justify any wrongdoer. But the United States and members of this panel are hardly in a position to be lecturing anyone about human rights abuses, never mind lecturing Rwanda, which has made remarkable progress in dispensing justice and establishing or reestablishing the rule of law after the genocide against the Tutsi minority in 1994. I'm almost finished.
Oh, thank you.
I also question the motives and the agenda of detractors, critics, and defectors who represented the government of Rwanda and worked side by side with President Paul Kagame for years before denouncing the very same government and president for crimes that, if we should believe their accusations, they themselves would have been complicit in committing against the Rwandan people. The reasonable and ordinary common sense person would require explanation for how it is that these critics and defectors have just suddenly come to see so clearly the wrongdoing of their colleagues and compatriots after being blind to these infractions for such a very long time. Why is it that they have waited until they are no longer enjoying the benefits of their position with this government in Rwanda to denounce and decry it as criminal and repressive? Those are my remarks, and I can go to the specifics of some of the other allegations that were made here that are repeated in the press and in human rights reports and amnesty reports that have not been verified. Even New York Times reports on some of these issues, circulating rumors and innuendos and accusations without facts to establish them.
Thank you, Dr. Gallimore. I think we're going to now turn to the audience. And I believe a mic is going to be handed around. Is that correct? So Steve, do you want to handle that, or do you want me to call on people? Okay. Yes, the gentleman here waving his hand. I'm going to